Pokemon gimmicks have been a thing since Generation 6, and my favorite one is definitely Mega Evolution or Terrestrialization. But there are some mechanics out there that I hate, and it's just the other two. I hate Z-moves, and I hate Dynamax. Dynamax is the worst mechanic. It looks cool, but in a competitive sense, it's kind of bad. It's kind of bad, huh? But that's why we're actually gonna be watching Wolfie VGC's video. First time reacted to Wolfie. My God, it's gonna be exciting. I'm excited to see what his take on the worst mechanic Pokemon is, because he is technically the best Pokemon player in the world, I think, right? So I feel like his opinion is probably gonna be the most valid, and hopefully he can speak better than I can. But let's get into it.
Game Freak just announced a new game called Pokémon Champions,
yeah,
which seems to be, as far as we can tell, a game entirely focused around competitive play. As somebody who cares a lot about competitive Pokemon, I was kind of freaking out when I heard about this. Wait, what? Wait, what is this? Wait, it's VGC! They're playing doubles! This could legitimately change the game. There's a huge chance that this new game brings so many new people into competitive Pokemon, which, I mean, I'm personally very excited about, and it really seems like regardless, it's going to be the next chapter for competitive Pokemon.
The only thing is, this game looks freaking phenomenal. I'm very excited for it. The only thing is, if you can't just change your EVs and IVs like on the fly in it, I don't think it's gonna bring that many people, to be honest. I think Pokemon needs to make it a little bit easier and maybe even teach people more about EVs and IVs, because a lot of people don't understand that, and that's obviously a huge importance in competitive play. So if they make it more like Pokemon Showdown, this game will be literally peak. Otherwise, it could just end up being like a Battle Revolution or like Pokemon Stadium, which they're cool, but like it's a little underwhelming, you know?
And I wasn't the only person who was rather excited about this announcement. However, the reasons that I were excited were a little bit different than the reasons that everybody else.
Wait, why Wolfie's excited for Pokemon? Dedicated VGC platform, epic. More accessible VGC. Is it though? Simpler team building? Is it though?
Seemed to be. Because there was one little detail that they revealed in the trailer that most people found a bit more exciting.
Wait.
Oh my God, Mega Charizard is coming back.
True.
And with it, probably the rest of the Mega Evolutions too, unless this game only has Mega Charizard.
That'd be
minutes,
weird.
The entire internet was in a tizzy over the return of the beloved Mega Evolutions to competitive play. And of course, the implication and strong likelihood that more new Mega Evolutions would be joining the fray.
Wait, the way he's going about this makes it seem like he thinks Mega Evolution is the worst mechanic. And if that's the case, Wolfie, I'm just a little disappointed. All right. Maybe it's not the best competitive, but it's awesome. It's so fun. I don't like Dynamax. I don't understand how Dynamax could be worse than Megas, but I don't know. We'll see.
We already knew Mega Evolutions were going to be coming back in Legends ZA, but that game is a little different than the main series game, so this is a big announcement nonetheless. And as seems to be the norm, whenever this conversation pops up, people use Mega Evolution to take pot shots at an especially big target. See, whenever past generational gimmicks become the topic of conversation, it seems to follow a pattern. Mega Evolutions, cool and hype.
Yep. Also, side note, do you guys like my Sylveon shirt? Isn't it cute? Sorry, I wanted to mention that earlier, but I forgot.
Dynamax, we hate it and it should burn forever.
Yep.
And it seems like most people don't really care too much about Z moves.
Yep,
but this general feeling isn't how I feel personally about these mechanics. And actually, I'll go one step further in that not only do I think that the hate for Dynamax is pretty overblown, I actually feel completely the opposite about the mechanic. I loved Dynamax, and to me, it's the best generational gimmick that Pokemon had created up until Scarlet and Violet.
Okay, I was gonna say, there is no way you think it's better than Terrestrialization. I think as a gimmick for battles, personally, I do think Jesus Christ, Terrestrialization is the best. I just personally like Megas the most because they're cool. But if I'm doing competitive battle, I think Terrestrialization adds more variety to the battle. It's not OP. It's pretty balanced. I just feel like Dynamax, I don't know. I feel like it's a little OP. It's a little OP.
Terrestrialization is actually pretty good. If you gave me the choice of the next games between having, I don't know, like Mega Flygon and Mega Evolution's Return, or the opportunity to make my Pokemon look really stupid and really big, I would go with the latter. I
don't think they're even cool. Like, I don't think they're cool. They're annoying to use. It takes forever to make them go up. Like, all right, we gotta see this motherfucker grow now for fucking 30 minutes. You know? I don't know. I like Megas way more.
I've said this so early in the video as you know, people are probably gonna leave because of that take, but That's the truth, okay? That's how I feel. But okay, if I'm gonna defend Dynamax so much, we have to talk about some of the reasons why it gets such a bad rep, right?
Yep.
Rep? I don't know. And
It's
of course, I need to explain why I personally feel differently. And of course, with anything so massive, balancing the scales is gonna be a gargantuan task. But before we can even attempt talking about why I think Dynamax was actually a really good mechanic competitively, okay? Competitively speaking, I'm not talking about the way it looks.
Yes,
we have to talk about what
fair.
Dynamax actually did. Or I guess technically I should say does, in case Chairman Rose is running Pokemon Champions.
See, I'm interested in this just because when we did Then We Battles, we actually banned Dynamaxing because we felt like it was way too OP. We felt like whoever, like, if you just did it at the right time, you just won. Like, it just felt very OP to it. And then when I did challenge videos, I feel like it was also just really OP. I don't know. I don't really like it that much. So I'm really interested to see like why he thinks it's the best. Because I don't feel like it's balanced. It just doesn't feel balanced to me.
And he brings back the Galar particles. Okay, I'm not going to pretend to understand the story or like the in-game reasoning for why Dynamax exists, okay? The only thing that I really remember from the story of Sword and Shield is that I really, really hate Sword, Burt, and Shieldward. These are actual real Pokemon characters, by the way.
Yeah, they look stupid.
Anyway, what does Dynamax actually do? Well, simply put, Dynamax makes your Pokemon bigger.
Yep.
That's the end of the video. Actually, that's not even technically true. According to the game's director, it like makes them bigger, but it's fake. Like their aura becomes massive, kind of like me when I win a tournament, but it's like, it's not actually real.
It's not real?
Unlike me when I win a tournament. Basically, the lore behind Dynamax is really confusing since like they did this interview with the game's director and he said that the Pokemon don't actually become larger, but instead this is kind of like a big astral projection and he doesn't even really know if they're inside or like what's going on with them. Anyway, it's all very strange.
Why not just say they get bigger? I don't know why you gotta make it so complicated. What the heck? Pokemon, come on, man, come on.
Regardless of whether or not Dynamax Pokemon are actually getting bigger, like technically, the gameplay mechanics are pretty simple to understand.
Yes.
Dynamaxing lasts for 3 turns, and it really only does 2 things. First of all, Dynamaxing doubles your Pokemon's HP if you remember to give it the right amount of Dynamax candy. Secondly, it transforms all the Pokemon's moves into max moves, which correspond to the original type of the move. For example,
And then they add a bonus effect to whatever type you use. It's quite useful. Like going for Max Flare sets up the sun. Then you can use Solar Beam and Fire moves do more. It's a little OP. It literally, I really, that's why I think it. I think Max Flare actually is kind of OP.
Water type moves turn into Max Geyser. Max moves are single target moves that can't miss, and how strong they are is based on how strong the original move was.
I think that's the only thing that's cool about them is they can't miss, because I hate Pokemon moves that can miss. I just feel like it's just the RNG thing I don't like about Pokemon, but so it is cool that they don't miss. That is dope.
So for example, Muddy Water and Hydro Pump both become single target moves called Max Geyser that both have perfect accuracy, but Hydro Pump will still do more damage because it started out stronger. These are a little bit like Z moves in that they all turn into the same move and get a power boost, but you can use them 3 turns in a row if you want, and they're not quite as strong as Z moves were in terms of just how much power they're giving, and every max move has a specific secondary effect. Some of these correspond to the type pretty intuitively, like Max Geyser and Max Flare setting up the weather, or terrain being set up by their corresponding types.
Yeah, those are good
moves
too.
That don't set up weather or terrain instead affect the stats of the Pokemon on the field, either for your team or for your opponents. And crucially, these boosts apply to both Pokemon on the same side of the field.
You know what? I didn't think about it. I'm thinking of, in my head, I'm thinking of singles because I don't like doing doubles, which I know like that's like the big competitive scene, whatever. But I just think of singles. I think it's OP in singles. I guess I never really thought about it as a doubles thing because both Pokemon do benefit. So I don't know how that ends up working out in like a double battles at space. But so I guess he'll tell me.
Sense. Steel boosts defense, flying boosts speed, but some of them seem to be chosen out of a mixture of like balancing and just plain assignment of the leftovers, like Dragon lowering your opponent's attack stats. Luckily for Game Freak, there are 5 stats to be affected with both boosts on your side or drops on your opponent for 10 total, 4 terrains and 4 weathers, adding up to a perfect 18 effects for all of the moves. Hitting a Pokemon using Protect with a max move will do a quarter of the damage that it would have done otherwise, just like Z moves did before them. Unless, of course, it's used into Max Guard, which is the max move version of all non-attacking moves, which protects even against attacking max moves. Also, if any of my viewers are named Max, I'm sorry, this is going to be a really confusing video. I didn't name the moves, okay? I feel like the longer this video goes on, the more people I'm isolating. Like, initially, I kind of talked smack about Mega Evolution, so that's like probably 95% of people. And then
you did.
I just, kind of confused all the people named Max. That's the remaining 4% of the people.
Sorry, we're gonna throw hands, Wolfie. You don't like megas? I don't like you. Just kidding. I don't know you, so I don't have an opinion. You seem cool.
So if you're in the 1% that's left, consider subscribing. If you do, maybe I won't say something that will cause you to hate me in my video. Yeah, this is a warning. If you don't subscribe, I will say something. I'm going to talk smack about the amulet coin. You better watch out. Anyway, that's pretty much everything that Dynamax does in its regular form. But as any good vegetarian knows, things change a bit when you add mushrooms to the equation. Certain Pokemon have special Gigantamax forms. Gigantamax Pokemon and Dynamax Pokemon are mostly identical, except for two small things. First, Gigantamax forms look different than the Pokemon's regular appearance. If Max moves are the spiritual successor to Z moves, Gigantamax is kind of like Mega Evolution 2.0. Some Pokemon mostly become greatly exaggerated versions of their original forms, like Pikachu or Venusaur, while others undergo total character transformations, like Snorlax, who grows a tree out of its stomach. Also, Gengar turns a portal into what looks like a very scary amusement park ride. These form changes are purely cosmetic though. Unlike Mega Evolution, they don't change the Pokemon's ability or stats at all. What they do change is the second difference from their Dynamax counterparts, the Pokemon's max moves. Well, specifically one of the Pokemon's max moves. Each G-Max form gets access to a unique signature move, replacing the max moves of one of their types with a new move that has its own unique secondary effect. And these can get a bit more wonky. These can range from status induction to setting other field effects to generating a secondary source of income. G-Max Meowth was given out.
You know what's funny? I actually never really messed with Gigantamax too much because I only knew Dynamax from all the challenges I did. But I never actually messed with the Gigantamax. Sorry, I was like, wait, what's the Dynamax and what again? So this is all new information to me, which is kind of fun.
Like promotionally, I believe, before the game. And like if you used it in battle, the max move would give you more prize money. I think it would double the prize money you got from like defeating an opposing trainer. And there was this like running joke that people like kind of believed was true, which is that if you won an official like live tournament with G-Max Meowth and you used the max move in the finals, that the Pokemon company would be obligated to give you double the prize money. Of course, then you're using G-Max Meowth, so I don't think anybody ever tried it, but I'm curious if they would have honored that. You know, it would have been really funny if they had. Some of these G-Max forms are good, some of them are great, and some are arguably worse than their regular max move counterparts. But that's pretty much all that Dynamax and Gigantamax do. Well, maybe saying that's all is a little bit of an undersell for a mechanic that's so game defining, but I mean, yeah, that's it. It's not anything crazy from a mechanical standpoint. So with that answered, that leads us to the next point, which is why do people hate?
Also, I just gotta say this. Wolfie posts pretty goddamn consistently, and like watching this video, there is a lot of edits to this. Obviously, he probably has an editor, but god dang, man, they are hustling. It is insane. Mad props.
Hate Dynamax so much. In fact, why is it probably the most hated mechanic out of all of the generational gimmicks? Is it over-centralizing? Is it unbalanced? We'll get to these points and whether or not they're true later. Because personally, I think that the reason so many people hate Dynamax is a good bit simpler. The vibes are just off, man. Put in the most simple
I'm gonna be honest, I guess like I think Z moves have no vibes. I think it's annoying. You have to go through this humongous animation for one move. It's just ridiculous. Dynamax, yeah, I guess the vibes are off, but that's not the reason I don't like it. But yeah, Terrestrialization and Megas just it has aura, bro. It has aura. Like, sure, the hats don't look crazy in Terrestrialization, but like the aura of your type being different and stuff is just so sick. And like the whole battlefield gets dark. I don't know. It's sick in my opinion.
Terms, I think that most people hate Dynamax because it just looks dumb. Now, to be clear, that's a subjective assessment, but I think this makes a little bit more sense when you remember that Dynamax was functioning effectively as a replacement for Mega Evolutions. And again, Mega Evolution was one of the most beloved mechanics we've ever had, and it hadn't stuck around for just one generation, but two, which maybe led people to believe that they would stick around for longer. If you made a word cloud out of all the terms people use to describe Mega Evolution, I think that the bubbles for words like awesome, dope, and pretty much any other synonym for cool would be pretty big. Dynamax, in contrast, can get pretty goofy. And look, personally, I love goofy Pokemon. They're some of my favorite designs. Honestly, my favorite Pokemon of all time is a coconut tree who looks like he just got hit on the head.
You know what's so funny? that he brought that up. I actually have been really liking Executor recently, like a lot more. I never really liked him, but I used him in a Let's Go playthrough I just did, and then I've been using him in my Pokemon Crystal playthrough I'm doing right now. And I don't know, I just really like him. He's cool. Grass Psychic, it resists a good amount a lot. So I'm like, honestly, it's kind of fun to use.
But the overall look of Dynamax leans way more towards the ridiculous than the sick with it. Big, kaiju-sized Pokemon is a cool concept, but when you add in the kind of wonky camera and how it makes the battlefield look unbalanced, things feel a little bit off. Seriously, once you Dynamax your Pokemon and the camera has to cut to an entirely new shot of them standing behind your other Pokemon, it starts to feel like they're recording a TV show where the stars had creative differences and they needed to shoot their scenes separately. That aesthetic difference only compounds on a few in-game decisions that make Dynamax feel decidedly less attractive to the player. Again, I have to compare it to Mega Evolution. And here we have to get into the design philosophies of these mechanics as they apply in game. Not the battle part.
The thing is, I think the aura like is definitely a big thing because like Mega Evolution, like I think, yeah, like it looks cool that you're doing it, but like the fact that you're evolving your Pokemon past like its maximum stage already it's just cool. I used it. I used cool, like you said earlier. It's really cool. Like it feels really dope. You're like, oh, dude, this is a big moment of the battle. I'm about to Mega Evolve. Like it's like Dynamax, not Dynamax, but it's like Terrestrialization. It's like, oh, this is a big moment. Like when somebody does Dynamaxes, it does feel like, all right, well, that was fun. That was a good battle. See ya. Like I feel like it's so, I don't know. It's weird. I maybe need to watch it used in a doubles battle to like see it like be used so I can see if it's like OP or not. But I mean, hopefully he'll talk about it more.
But how they function in the narrative and the story. Mega Evolution had this sense of progression. After unlocking the ability to Mega Evolve in the first place, you're given the chance to hunt down and collect all these different Mega Stones.
And it's easy. It's easy. There's no like, I need to give them mushrooms so they can get better. I get the stone, I put it on the Pokemon, it works. I think the simplicity actually is really good for like a casual player. You know what I mean?
Unique treasures that could inspire you to use a new Pokemon or to get you hype about one of your existing favorites.
Yes.
There was investment in terms of exploration, discovery, and the care spent on a particular Pokemon. Now look, I do have my issues with Mega Evolution's rich get richer philosophy, but by limiting Megas to specific Pokemon, Game Freak significantly increased the personal attachment that you would have to those Pokemon.
That's fair.
Absol, for example, was already a cool Pokemon, but I'm willing to bet that many people like Absol a lot more because they got to use its Mega Evolution in the Gen 6 and 7 games.
To be honest, I wasn't actually a huge Absol fan as a kid. I actually liked it more when it got a Mega. So I think, honestly, I think that I could be the like outlier here. I feel like that one definitely needed it. There are some Pokemon that definitely needed it, but I do understand that most of the Pokemon that got it are like already fan favorites. So people became more of a fans of them. If Megas went on all the Pokemon, I think it'd be a little bit better.
In these games, you want to Mega Evolve your Pokemon, and the time that you put into raising them and to acquiring the specific stones feels like it's given you a specific, exciting reward.
Yeah, because it does feel like you have a bond, because you're like, oh, dude, I got this, I've been training this Pokemon from like the ground up. Sure, it's already fully evolved now, but now I go grab the stone to make it fully evolve more. Like we went through this huge journey together. I think like the attachment to it is really good, which I think Pokemon aims for. They want you to be attached to the Pokemon. And
Dynamax is almost exactly the opposite.
Yep.
The fact that any Pokemon can Dynamax means that there isn't any one of your Pokemon that is now special. They've all become equally more special at the same time, meaning relatively they're all equally as cool as they were before. And as soon as you unlock Dynamax, you can immediately Dynamax every single Pokemon that you have, making it feel way more like a checkbox you've ticked rather than a cool power-up that you've unlocked over time.
Yep, that's
I also
totally
think that
fair.
Dynamax's limited use in-game has something to do with this. You are only allowed to Dynamax yourself in a handful of situations during the story. And while that does instill
I think that's a huge problem too. When you're a casual person not playing competitive, you only can Dynamax in gyms. Sure, it's every gym. Like you unlock it at the beginning of the game and you can do it every single gym. But that's kind of lame because like sometimes like Mega's cool.
Sense of narrative.
Sorry, I didn't mean to continue you. Shut up for a second, Wolfie. God, I'm trying to talk. It's my video too. With like Megas and like Terrestrialization, you can just use it whenever you want, which is cool because like sometimes you're like, I just want to see my Mega Pokemon. I just want to see what he looks like. Oh, that's cool. You know, like in like a random trainer battle. But Dynamax, you can't do that. So it's just kind of like, okay, this is only used for the big battles. That's kind of annoying.
narrative importance means that you spend a decent amount of the game not really even thinking about it. Max raids are cool in concept, but they're also a little bit janky. Now, to be fair, Game Freak did their best to add some sort of progression. That's the point of Dynamax Candy and the Gigantamax forms that are unique. Honestly though, getting Gigantamax forms felt really stupid. It was grindy and luck-based, and it mostly didn't come from the natural progression of the story.
Yeah, that's funny. That's why I don't think I ever got into it, because I was like, I don't even know how to do it, and obviously if it's complicated, why the fuck would I do it? You know what I mean? I'd rather just be able to go somewhere, pick something up, and be like, all right, I can Gigantamax my Pokemon now. You know what I mean?
Others have. It's a simple formula. You give me a shiny stone in the corner of a cave that I had to obsessively search, and I'm happy. But when you're not using the mechanic that often, it figures that you wouldn't care as much about it, especially if your reward for a long search is like, oh, Gigantamax Kingler. I actually do like Gigantamax Kingler, but I thought I wanted to pick one that I didn't think was going to be super popular, but I like Gigantamax Kingler.
Hey,
really though, this ultimately comes down to feel. And Dynamax, to me, doesn't feel as transformative. New and exciting spins on Pokemon that needed some love, or a cherry on top for fan favorites that Mega Evolution provides. All right, I'm probably making this more complicated than it needs to be. Let me use a much simpler comparison. Think back to your first Pokemon game and what some of your most memorable moments were. Outside of a starter Pokemon or a shiny Pokemon or maybe beating the Elite Four, I'm gonna guess that evolving your Pokemon ranks pretty high up there. Even nowadays, think about how excited we get whenever an old Pokemon gets a new evolution, whether that's an Evolution or Surfetched. When you get down to it, both Dynamax and Mega Evolution are similar in execution. You click a button that's in about the same place in the battle screen, and your Pokemon transforms. Mega Evolution, appropriately enough, feels like evolution. Dynamax, unfortunately, feels like clicking a button. Even past that, I think that people were already primed to kind of hate Dynamax before the game's even released.
Really?
Obviously, it was replacing an already beloved mechanic. No, not you, but it also came packaged with games that replaced some other beloved things, or more accurately, zapped them out of existence. Because Sword and Shield was the gen of... Warning.
Oh, gosh,
Exit discussion detected. Cease discourse in 3, 2, 1. Sorry, had that installed for my own safety. If I talk about this any longer, my comment section is going to be more of a mess than it already is. But yes, okay, it was the Dexit gen, which meant people already were not happy with Sword and Shield in general. Okay, I'm done.
Yeah, literally. I mean, besides that, I don't know. When going into Sword and Shield, besides the Dex thing, I was like so hyped for him. I had so much hype going into him, and I really enjoyed the games. I was playing the crap out of them when they first got released. I played too much of it to where I don't like playing it anymore, but originally I loved the games.
Okay, look, with that thing that I just mentioned, Sword and Shield were already not, how do you say, liked. People were hating on these games before they even released. Not even gonna talk about
the tree instance. Oh my god, holy crap, everyone was talking about the freaking trees. I'm like, calm down, bro, it's not that big of a deal.
The tree discourse, okay? Adding in some of the polish issues that we talked about, like with max raids or in the wild area, and going into these games, people were already primed to deride most parts of the generation, especially the big gimmick that just replaced their beloved Mega Evolution. In my opinion, most of these issues were, just like Dynamax itself, blown up to epic proportions. But there's one final reason why Dynamax was so loathed, and it requires a history lesson. We are currently living through competitive Pokemon's most popular era ever. Tournaments have more players than they know what to do
right now.
Casual players can enter easier than before. Brand new players are winning their first tournaments ever, even when it's a major event. I'm a little biased, but I think this is awesome, and I think it's only up from here when Champions finally releases. But when Sword and Shield came out, the official competitive format wasn't the most popular way to play Pokemon against other players. In fact, just 5 years ago, fan formats that used the single battles were much more popular, as they have been for most of the series' history. And here, we finally touch on the mechanics, because Dynamax is, no holds barred, no reservations, an absolutely awful mechanic in single battles.
Okay, so I'm technically correct then. It's awful for singles. That's what I thought. I wasn't really thinking about doubles at the beginning when I first started this video. I was thinking about singles because in dummy fights, it was disgustingly broken. And in singles, I was like, yeah, you just win. Especially if you have like a cohesive team, you just win.
Its snowball potential is just way too massive.
Yes, exactly.
And certain Pokemon benefited from it way more than others, throwing their viability out of whack. In fact, Generation 8 marked the first time that these fan formats have ever banned a generational mechanic. It makes perfect sense why they did. Dynamax clearly wasn't designed
Oh, it was actually banned in singles? That's so interesting. I didn't know that. That makes so much sense, though, because I was like, dude, this thing is cool.
With those types of battles in mind. Just another reason why using it in-game felt almost like cheating.
Yeah.
So far, I've just talked about the vibes. But here, mechanics become vibes. Because if your mechanic isn't fun to play with, then what's the point?
Yep.
Since Dynamax was so bad for single battle formats, and single battle formats were the most popular at the time, is there any wonder that it gets such a bad rep? Don't know. So Dynamax already had a bad smell attached to it, but it would be a disservice to the Dynamax haters to go off scent alone. I might not agree with them entirely, but some people did have real mechanical issues with Dynamax, including quite a few high-level competitive players, even when just talking about the official competitive format. Let's talk about the mechanics of Dynamax. First of all, that snowball effect where one Pokemon could power itself up and just kind of run away with the game was definitely mitigated in double battles. But of course, you were definitely liable to see the occasional avalanche. Now, a key part of any high-level battle is determining which of your opponent's Pokemon that you want to attack.
Yeah.
Dynamax demands attention, often changing the process of that selection. It's undeniable that Dynamax warped the way that battles were played, and I can understand players not liking such a shift from what they were used to. Pokemon battles can sometimes feel like a song, and no two songs are alike depending on their pieces. Here, those dynamics often come from the Pokemon. Some battles start slow and then speed up towards the end. Others resolve instantly. All kilter, no filter. Don't know if that's an expression. And still others chug along slowly at a dirge-like consistency towards their inevitable end. Because for some reason, the guy that you're playing is using Perish Song. Who does that? But sometimes, especially in the early days of Sword and Shield, Dynamax seemed to conform things to the same rhythm. Usually, you can disrupt your opponent's chosen melody with good team building. But with the power provided by Dynamax, it was sometimes possible to just make one of your Pokemon really strong, turn up the volume, and drown out your opponent's song. It was not uncommon at all to see a lot of battles start with one player being forced to Dynamax, and then the other one Dynamaxing in response one turn later.
Well, that's the thing with Dynamaxing. It just felt like if they Dynamax, you had to Dynamax. With like terrestrialization, it feels like they terrestrialize, but you don't need to. They've just changed their type. You don't need to unless like they're posing a threat now. But a lot of the times they're just doing it defensively to like block a hit. You can usually save yours for later. It's not like you need to do it right after. Dynamax, it kind of feels like you do. If they Dynamax, you're like, I got to Dynamax now because I got to make sure I live these hits.
The idea was that since Dynamax Pokemon did more damage and they got more HP, if you could have access to powerful Dynamax attacks while your opponent didn't have the HP boost to mitigate it, you'd have the advantage. So many players would try to Dynamax one turn after their opponent. At the time, a lot of players were throwing around the phrase, whoever Dynamaxes second wins. One thing that we mentioned earlier, but we didn't really talk about how it makes a player feel, is unblockable attacks. Frankly, it just feels bad to take damage even when you use Protect. Like, the whole point of using Protect is that you're not going to take damage, right? And in general, Dynamax just added more damage into the game, which some players see as adding more volatility and reducing the skill expression. Speaking of volatility, some of these Gmax effects undeniably added variance, like Hatterini confusing your Pokemon, Butterfree applying random status effects, or with some other moves that we'll get to later. This was only compounded by Dynamax's undeniably dumb interaction with the item Life Orb. Now, the way that Pokemon works and the way that I believe many video games work is that when you have a Pokemon that's already strong or any character that's already strong, and you're able to add certain multipliers in to make them stronger, the damage can scale really dramatically really quickly. Dynamax was basically adding a roughly 50% damage multiplier to a lot of your Pokemon's moves. And so to prevent the game from just becoming, who can do the most damage simulator, the Pokemon Company made the choice to disable the choice items on Dynamax
that's right,
Pokemon.
that's true.
These items provide a 50% power boost, but don't allow the Pokemon to switch their moves. When Dynamax, the item is...
I remember that when I was doing challenge videos, I found that out and I was like, oh my God, this is freaking game changer. Because you can slap a choice band, or I think I was slapping like choice scarves on or something. And then when they would set out a mon that they would resist me, I would just Dynamax to like prevent it. So it was definitely in challenge videos, it was game changer.
Effectively disabled. It's like your Pokemon is no longer holding an item. However, they made an oversight with the Life Orb item. Life Orb is an item that boosts your attacking moves by a factor of 30% in exchange for doing 10% of your own Pokemon's HP every time you land an attack, which is a pretty significant drawback. But when a Pokemon is Dynamaxed, Life Orb would still provide that 30% power buff, buff, but would instead calculate that 10% HP using your Pokemon's
That's
original
crazy.
HP.
I didn't know that.
You were only losing 5% of your Dynamax Pokemon HP. And when your Dynamax ended and you went back to regular form, how much HP you had left was calculated using the percentage of HP that your Dynamax
I wish I would have known that when we did then we fight Sword and Shield. That's way better.
Dynamax stayed as 5% even when you went back to small form. So Dynamax added a lot of damage into the game that some players didn't vibe with. In short, it was a big, impactful transformation that shifted the gravity of a battle, which is exactly what it was intended to do. It did change battles a lot, and I totally get why people don't like that. I'm not saying it's the wrong take to think that Dynamax was a bad mechanic, but it's not my opinion. I thought that Dynamax was really good, if not straight up great. A good mechanic by itself, for sure, and additionally, please, I'm sorry that this is my opinion, I really am, but I think it's a huge improvement over Mega Pokemon, which I personally see as one of the worst mechanics that Game Freak has ever introduced.
That's crazy.
As a competitive player, I agree they look awesome. Okay, I like Mega Evolutions as a fan of Pokemon, but in a strictly competitive setting, I don't think they're very good at all, personally. They just look really cool. Anyway, all of this to say that if you dislike Dynamax, that's a perfectly valid response. Like, I'm not saying you have to like it.
You're valid
before you
too,
form a permanent opinion, at least let me explain why I'm personally a fan. Appropriately enough, just like we talked about with the negative stuff, let's start by talking about the vibes. Now look, I just ragged on Dynamax for looking kind of dumb, and I personally still believe that, yeah, it does look stupid. I'm with you there.
We're all there.
When it worked, it really worked. Sword and Shield may catch some flack, but I think that the commitment to hype, and especially to spectacle, paid off big time. Like, okay, this is how battles look in Scarlet and Violet. You can see the infamous double grandma, double waving part of the battle, right? And now look at this.
No, I get that, but like the thing is, I don't think this animation from him getting bigger is cooler. I think just being in the stadium is cool. So you don't need Gigantamax for that. I feel like they should just put stadiums in every game, or at least in the Wi-Fi battles and stuff. If the Wi-Fi battles were looked like this now with terrestrialization, it'd be awesome. It'd be so sick. But the battles on the beach with the grandma, yeah, it's a little rough. I don't know why they decided to go from this to that. It's insane to me. Yeah, maybe at the school, but that's it.
Sword, Shield, Stadium, Coliseum, giant Pokemon. Like, I don't know. I think it really kind of captures that feeling of an intense Pokemon battle much more than we're getting in Scarlet and Violet.
For sure, I agree.
And some of the Dynamax and especially Gigantamax Pokemon were cool even when they were kind of goofy. Like, look at Gigantamax Centiskorch animations, or really, honestly, any of the Max moves. They feel cinematic,
the Max ones are cool.
big. And also, some of the dumb parts of Dynamax are personally really endearing to me. I love that Gengar becomes an amusement park ride, or that Charizard's wings light on fire. I honestly even like that they just explode with 3 different camera shots whenever they faint. And yes, the story moments that you can Dynamax are limited, but when they do happen, they're really memorable. I think I'm not alone in saying that the final battle against Leon and his Gigantamax Charizard is one of the most memorable final battles in the series. And that's not even talking about Gigantamax Eternatus. Like, that really feels like a raid boss battle in a way that not many Pokemon games have provided thus far. Sword and Shield, and by extension, Dynamax, lean into some of the most immediately accessible parts of Pokemon, even to people who don't care about competitive battles. It recreates those Ash Pokemon League battles from the anime, taking place in a stadium, 2 trainers matched evenly, the outcome inevitably determined by ace against ace. And while they might be limited moments, honestly, that's kind of how I experience Mega Evolution too. Because if I think back to my in-game playthrough of X and Y or Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, I actually don't know how often I was using Mega Evolution except in the big battles. I mean, listen, like, these games aren't especially difficult, and the Mega Evolution animation is not especially short.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but I feel like that's the same for Dynamax. Like, I mean, I'm not using it all the time. I'm only using it because they're going to Dynamax this turn, so I might as well too. The games are always easy. That's the problem, is they're always easy, no matter what the playthrough is. But if you're not doing competitive, which obviously this video is definitely about, I do think for the casual play, I think Megas are just cooler and more fun to use. Because the animation is shorter than Gigantamax. Gigantamax is the longest one besides Z-moves. Z-moves, like, oh my god, that one's ridiculous.
I'm not even sure if I busted them out on like every gym leader. These guys have round the clock hours, no union, and every so often a 10-year-old comes in to shake them down for their hard-earned cash. I don't want to make them also suffer through my anime transformation magical girl sequence, you know what I mean? And if I wasn't using Mega Evolution on the gym leaders, you can bet I wasn't shaking down youngster Joey with, you know, Mega Lucario.
Oh, I was.
It's not even a kindness. I just, like, it's not worth the time. To be honest, I think that a decent amount of the hate for Dynamax in the story mode is really just hate for Chairman Rose.
Yeah, the story's bad, but I didn't really hate
yes,
him.
the vibes were off at
Whatever.
times, but I don't think they were off like for the entirety of the times. Don't know if that makes sense. Whatever, I've already said it. The vibes are like half on, half off. Like my pants. Cut that. Like, I wanted to make that joke being like, oh, you know, sometimes I record and I don't put pants on, which isn't even true. I always have pants on when I'm recording just in case, but then it just sounds like I'm doing something inappropriate, so you can cut that. Okay, so we talked about the vibes. Now let's talk about the mechanics. And really here, this is where the meat and potatoes of why I like Dynamax so much comes into play. See, I think that those complaints that I brought up about the game rhythm were valid at first, like when the game first released and we were trying to figure out how to use Dynamax properly. However, as we spent 3 years playing with the mechanic, and as we all got better at playing around it, people started to find ways to play their own tune again. First turn Dynamaxes started winning less. The strategy began to develop more and more as players started using Dynamax independent of their opponents, and players even started learning when to ignore a Dynamax Pokemon. And that's because, all in all, I think that Dynamax was one of the highest skill cap mechanics that Game Freak has ever added to the game, for multiple distinct reasons. First of all, and this is one of the reasons that players were able to develop their understanding so much, Dynamax is the first time that Game Freak has added a mechanic that was at once both offensive and defensive. Now, yes,
It was the first, I guess the first mechanic, because I think terrestrialization also is like that, but yeah, I guess as this was the first one technically.
Technically, some Mega Evolutions get a boost to their bulk, but functionally, it was pretty rare to see anyone play around getting the bulk. It was much more common that you would use offensive Mega Evolution, like is the reason why Mega Audino was never really used. Otherwise, every single generational mechanic, being Megas, Z-moves, and you can even throw the gems from Generation 5 in there if you want, they all were purely offensive. We've talked a lot about how Dynamax adds more damage into the game, but it also adds a ton of defense to mitigate that. Dynamax is basically a 100% boost to HP, but at most a 50% boost to power, which to me felt like a really good balance. Now, of course, that 50% calculus isn't exact when you consider the terrains and the weathers and stat boosts that you could set up, but I personally am a huge fan of the max move's secondary effects. For one thing, it felt like Game Freak making good on mechanics that were incredibly niche beforehand. Prior to Dynamax, terrain and weather were limited to a handful of lucky picks.
Yeah, it's mostly just
It really
abilities.
felt like a shame that you couldn't use Misty Terrain, which has a ton of cool defensive applications, unless you were literally bringing Tapu Fini.
Yeah.
I guess technically Galarian Weezing too, but I mean, come on, like if you're using Weezing, you're shutting out abilities, right? And of course,
Yeah, true.
technically the move Misty Terrain exists, but nobody clicked it because like the benefits weren't worth it. It was way too niche, way too like, I don't know, low impact to run like to dedicate a whole move to using. As opposed to being a subtle, nuanced effect that you could play around fluidly, these conditions were really all or nothing. Like if you brought a Drizzle Pokemon, you were probably going to be playing around the rain strategy because it was such a big investment to get it set up. Suddenly, with Dynamax, Weather Wars became much more dynamic, Terrain Wars too, and you could actually use them as supporting options on the fly, not as entire strategies that you build your team around. When you were using Dynamax Pokemon, you had to think about all of your moves' secondary effects and all of your opponent's moves' secondary effects as well. And until they committed Dynamax to one of their Pokemon, you had to think about which Pokemon could Dynamax on every single turn, as the best players eventually mastered the timing of when to Dynamax an unusual pick. Dynamax gave the player two critical choices: when and who. First, let's talk about the when. Just the choice of when to Dynamax was a huge decision that required loads of skill. Now, technically, you still made this decision with both the Z moves and Mega Evolution, but especially in the case of Mega Evolution, evolving early was in most situations just always correct, unless you were trying to preserve like Intimidate on Mega Salamence or Mega Mawile.
Yeah.
Other than that though, you were almost always Mega Evolving right away to get the stat boost immediately. With Dynamax, I certainly won games both by burning my Dynamax early and by spending it late to secure a game, even when I was using the same Pokemon or even when I was facing down the same matchup. Now, the when may share some similarities with other past mechanics, but the who was entirely new. While Megas were obviously limited in distribution and Z moves required an item slot before the battle that limited your choice, Dynamax was available to all Pokemon no matter what. And while I said earlier that it made it feel less unique from a vibe standpoint, it certainly did the opposite from a battling perspective. Even if you went into a battle with a preferred Dynamax target in mind, the choice of who to Dynamax was a really high skill decision that could totally change the way that battles played out.
Yeah, I was gonna say that terrestrialization is kind of nice because you can literally, yeah, you have a plan maybe to like, oh, I'm gonna Dynamax or terrestrialize my Kyogre, but like maybe in the heat of the battle, you're like, wait, I don't need to right now. Honestly, maybe I'll Dynamax my Whimsicott later. You know, like you can save it, which is nice. You don't need to use it on that mon. Where like I guess as megas, yeah, you're like, okay, I have to mega this guy and he has to mega this guy, so like I can plan for that easy. This, it's harder to plan for because now not only you're taking in like predictions for moves, protect, stuff like that, but now you're having to take in which mon is he getting Dynamax. Like, sure, this is his best option, but like he might not do that or she might not do that. You know what I mean? So like, I guess I understand like the skill gap's pretty big for it.
And the best players could leverage that to their advantage in creative and unexpected ways.
Yeah.
For example, let's take a look at this clip from my good friend Dr. Aaron Trailer in top 8 of the Salt Lake City Regionals. Aaron's got a Kyogre and a Whimsicott on the field against his opponents Incineroar and Amoonguss, and he decides to Dynamax Whimsicott? You can even hear the commentators' doubt as they see it happening.
Quite likely for it, and that was not the one.
And that doubt seems to be well placed when Aaron's Max Starfall does absolutely pitiful damage into Amoonguss. But the damage isn't what Aaron was using it for. It's the misty terrain.
Yeah.
With terrain up, Amoonguss' Spore is totally negated, leaving Aaron's
sick.
Kyogre free to keep attacking. And as if that play wasn't enough, Aaron demonstrates just how out of the box he is by immediately switching Whimsicott out, only getting the value from his Dynamax for one of the 3 turns, but gaining himself enough momentum in the process to functionally lock up the game.
That's sick. I mean, that's what's so funny about Pokemon. Like the announcers were doubting it. It's like viewers sometimes watching. They're like, why did someone do this? Why did they do this or this? And I'm like, dude, there is so much that goes on with a Pokemon battle. It is literally insane.
Not all of us are as smart as Dr. Aaron Trailer, but these sort of turns are why I think that Dynamax has so much skill involved. Instead of just boosting one Pokemon permanently or firing off an attack, you've got layers and layers of different consequences to think about. Will the terrain save me? Or will Max Airstream dynamically adjust my speed so that my partner can cinch a KO? Or will changing the weather weaken my opponent's Pokemon enough that I can survive? These are some of the things you have to think about with Dynamax, and you have to think about them all at the same time.
Yep.
The secondary effects weren't even all you had to think about. Dynamax allowed for some truly niche plays that could showcase skill in team building too. For example, one oddity of Dynamax came with the move Copycat. Copycat, pretty simple move to understand. Whatever the last move used was, Copycat uses that instead. But what happens if Copycat tries to copy a Max move? Well, as it turns out, Copycat will copy the original move, like the move that the Max move was based on. So, you know, if you were using Max Flare and used Copycat right after, it would use Flamethrower, or whatever you were using that turned into Max Flare. However, this also extends to status moves that have been turned into Max Guard. So at Collinsville Regionals, I used a team that used Liepard with Copycat for one very crafty purpose: to set up Trick Room. You don't normally see a fast Pokemon like Liepard use Trick Room, and that's because it can't learn it. But what it can do is stick to its cat-like nature. If I used Copycat on my fellow Dynamax Reuniclus, the strategy works altogether as follows. First, Reuniclus Dynamaxes. Then it uses Max Guard, which moves before all other moves because of its extremely high priority. Then Liepard moves next thanks to its Prankster ability, which gives its moves an increased stage of priority 2, though less priority than Max Guard. It then uses Copycat, copying the last move used, which in this case was Max Guard. The Copycat can't copy Max moves, so it uses the base move instead. And the base move that Reuniclus used to shield itself is Trick Room. So that means that suddenly Trick Room is set up safely before my opponents can even attack, and I still have full HP on my Dynamax Pokemon and 2 turns left to play with.
That's crazy.
Obviously, this is just one specific niche example when it comes to moves.
See, this is what I'm talking about. The battles they're so niche. Like, it's insane how niche it can get. Like I wasn't thinking about that, and I do a lot. Like, I don't do comp play, but like we do a lot of fights, and we do a lot of different things in those fights. That, like, the casual player, dude, who the hell is thinking of that? It's insane.
What I'm really trying to get at here is that Dynamax took a lot of skill to use, and not even just with max moves. Players had to develop a whole new host of skills. One of these was baiting out your opponent's Dynamax, which is something that I did quite a lot to win the Players' Cup too. So for context, during the pandemic, all in-person tournaments were canceled, and they were replaced with 4 tournaments called the Players' Cup 1 through 4. These were extremely difficult tournaments. There were 2 different elimination play-in rounds that used 2 different formats, but you had to make it all the way through in order to get to the global finals, which was something I would say around an international level event or a worlds event. Some regions couldn't participate in these, so I would say it certainly wasn't as competitive as a worlds event, but it was probably at least as hard as most internationals, if not a little bit harder. Very prestigious tournaments. Everyone was playing. There was no barriers because you could play from home. So like players who couldn't travel, like were still able to participate.
That's cool.
Very difficult tournament. I won the second Players Cup, and I did it by actually using a strategy based around Dynamax. My strategy was built around Gigantamax Colossal. The strategy itself was pretty interesting. It used Colossal's steam engine ability and the weakness policy item to basically put Colossal at +6 speed and double its offenses, which allowed it to do tons of damage and use its special G-Max move to do even more damage. It was an extremely threatening Pokemon. I don't need to get into all the, the specifics of the strategy here just yet, but what you need to know is that if you weren't careful around Colossal, it would pretty much just blow through your opponent's team. So what I did basically almost every game in this tournament is I would lead with Colossal and a Pokemon that could activate the steam engine, whether that was Urshifu or Dragapult. And so seeing this and knowing that if they didn't respect it, they would often just lose right away, my opponent would normally just Dynamax turn 1, right? Just like, oh, they see Colossal, they don't want to lose their Pokemon. They've probably led with the Pokemon that they have that beats Colossal. Dynamax right away so they don't have to deal with it. And what I would do is I would immediately switch Colossal out and go into a defensive Pokemon like Incineroar or Rillaboom. And I would often use a move that slowed down my opponent's damage output with Dragapult, like Will-O-Wisp or Light Screen or Breaking Swipe. And so then I would try and use this damage reduction and this kind of slower playstyle to stall out all 3 turns of my opponent's Dynamax, which was difficult because they were Dynamax, but I would do what I could. And if I was successful, then after 3 turns, they wouldn't have Dynamax anymore. And
that's so interesting because like, I don't know, like why would they? I mean, in that specific situation, like, I don't know. It's obvious he's going to switch to Rillaboom. Like, right? In my mind, that's obvious. He's going to go to the Mon that resist it. Why would he keep it? I don't know. I guess that's how my brain works.
And then I would go into Colossal, try and set up, and effectively try and run away with the game once they'd already burned through their Dynamax. The strategy was really good, and again, it won me the Players Cup too, and it's a really cool way of using Dynamax where you use the threat of Dynamax right away to bait out your opponent's Dynamax, and then in actuality, you use it as a bait and switch and then finish them off with your true Dynamax later. I just thought it was a cool strategy, so I wanted to talk about it here. Dynamax also breathed new life.
That's interesting. I mean, it's interesting that many people kind of fell for it. Cause I don't know. I don't feel like I would want to go all in on that turn. I don't know.
A number of old moves that weren't seeing a ton of play otherwise. Yawn was a move that actually did really well because Yawn basically causes a Pokemon to fall asleep at the end of the next turn unless they switch out, which if a Pokemon is Dynamaxed and they switch, they give up the Dynamax forever. So you could put your opponent in a situation where their choices were switch and give up their Dynamax or stay in and fall asleep. So 2 bad choices. The other move that I want to talk about though is Trick, another move that saw some interesting play in the Dynamax era. Basically, there was no way to get rid of a Dynamax Pokemon. You couldn't switch it out with Roar. You couldn't switch it out with Whirlwind or any of those moves. There was nothing you could do to get rid of your opponent's Dynamax except encourage them to switch out with moves like Yawn. However, there was one exception, which is that if a Dynamax Pokemon holding the eject button gets hit with a move, because it's like them switching themselves out, it will still activate.
Oh, so you trick it onto them?
So there was
That's
this
so
one
funny.
very gimmicky strategy that my friends and I used where you would use a prankster Pokemon with the move Trick to switch your item with your opponent, and then you would immediately follow up with a priority move like Quick Attack, for example, to activate the eject button right away. This required a hard read on what your opponent's Pokemon was Dynamaxing, and it wasn't like so popular. It was kind of like considered pretty gimmicky for the most part. If you wanted to use Trick, you would normally use an item like the Lagging Tail, which also really hurt a Pokemon and caused them to get a lot worse. But wasn't all or nothing.
Dude, I ain't gonna lie. I mean, we don't really do doubles, but I'm gonna keep that strategy in mind because that's a really cool strategy to eject button, trick someone, and then quick attack. Like, in singles, it could even help because if you're thinking about like a Mon that's really set up on the other person's team, if you do have a Pokemon with Prankster that can use Trick and give him the eject button, then you could just send something in with priority at the next turn.
On prediction, but the strategy was so funny. It's truly one of the hardest I've ever laughed in my life.
Yeah, that's hilarious. That's like such a waste of a Dynamax.
So I have very fond memories of Trick Eject Button. However, ironically, at the first tournament of Sword and Shield, I was eliminated in Game 3 on a Trick Eject Button that my opponent had kept hidden, which I didn't know that they had, and they used it to get rid of my Dynamax, and that's how I was eliminated. So it was definitely karmic that the strategy that I had to help popularize, was used to knock me out of the tournament.
Yep, that sucks.
Anyway, it wasn't just moves that got new life breathed into them. Dynamax actually introduced entire new Pokemon as options. Niche picks made viable by their specific interaction with the mechanic. The ability Hustle suddenly became very good, with Pokemon like Durant becoming fearsome, thanks to them receiving the power boost that Hustle provides, while ignoring the downside that they normally get of Hustle's reduced accuracy. This is again that thing with multiplicative scaling and Hustle actually working well with it. There were also behemoth tanks like Rhyperior who were better able to exploit the formerly mostly unused item like Weakness Policy. Weakness Policy boosts your offensive stats if you're hit with a super effective move, but normally getting hit with a super effective move means you're taking a lot of damage, so these strategies aim to use the HP boost that Dynamax provided to effectively get all the benefit with half of the cost. Some Pokemon that were already good were able to be played in slightly different ways, like Kartana. Kartana, for reference, is basically Kindling. It has one of the worst special defense stats in the game. It's even able to get OHKO'd by extremely weak moves like Ember under normal circumstances. But with Dynamax doubling its HP, Kartana found itself using an item that had been far riskier to use before, Assault Vest, turning it into a Pokemon that suddenly didn't look quite as flimsy as paper. Then of course there were Gigantamax forms themselves, allowing Pokemon that you would never use before to be used. Pokemon like Lapras, Butterfree, Charizard, Pikachu were all Pokemon that were given a second chance thanks to their unique Gigantamax forms. And that's only talking about Pokemon that were made viable because they wanted to Dynamax. Plenty of Pokemon also rose in viability because of how good they were at fighting against Dynamax. Dusclops had already functioned as the unevolved representatives for their respective forms of speed control, but with Dynamax, they gained another important supporting function through the ability to use the move Haze and reset the stat boosts and drops. Gastrodon, which was often derided in the past as a do-nothing Pokemon, was suddenly public enemy number 1 for its bulk, stalling potential, storm drain ability, and access to the move Yawn, a move that became drastically better because Dynamax Pokemon were so loath to switch out. Dynamax might have felt like it made the rich richer in terms of power, but in fact, it often ended up benefiting the have-nots more than anyone else. In short, Dynamax provided more options. And personally, I'm always a fan of more options, chances to lean into the creativity of Pokemon team building. But the really impressive thing was that it managed to do all of this while feeling mostly balanced. Mostly. There were some problems. And here, this is where I really say that it outshines Mega Pokemon. Mega Pokemon, as cool as they are decidedly not balanced, and I don't think anyone would argue with that. I personally think that Mega Evolution kind of got carried off of the cool factor, because frankly, the balancing was just abysmal. Like, the ones that were good were so much better than the other Mega Pokemon that it became nearly mandatory to use like one of the top 5 or 6 on your team.
That's fair.
I think it just didn't feel as bad because Mega Evolution was so cool. Megas, in a way.
But like at the same time, I think that's just Pokemon. There's like a select few Pokemon that are just amazing that everyone uses, you know?
Felt like using a restricted Pokemon. Dynamax still felt like playing Pokemon. It just felt really different. Game Freak really leveled up their balancing between Megas and Dynamax. They used it to pull certain balance levers in ways that felt intentional and healthy for the game. Dynamax does add damage, but it also has a lot of mechanics that reduce the variance. For example, your Dynamax Pokemon cannot be flinched. For another, all of their moves are 100% accurate. More HP also means that critical hits are less impactful. All this adds up to a situation where skilled players can use Dynamax to avoid the sort of totally luck-based situations that ruin games that would otherwise be won. But if I'm going to show you one example of intentional balancing, it has to do with 2 moves in particular, Max Knuckle and Max Ooze. These moves are, respectively, the moves that boost your side of the field's attack and special attack stats when used. Now, using an attacking move that simultaneously boosts your own attack stat is a recipe for a balanced nightmare. Just ask Mega Kangaskhan if you don't believe me. But Game Freak did something very, very smart. Something that shows that they had their hands on the right levers. They made these moves weak. See, max moves of other types got a percentage boost that reduces in power the higher the base power of the original move, but still ends up stronger the higher you go. Basically, so that weaker moves still feel impactful, but stronger ones don't get overwhelming. That probably doesn't make any sense. So let's take a look at the common fire type moves, for example. You can see that there are diminishing returns, but if you want the absolute most powerful moves, you still have to use the strongest ones when you aren't Dynamaxed. Sometimes there are some interesting drawbacks, like using Blast Burn that will hamper you outside of Dynamax but is stronger inside. For the most part, the power of these moves caps out at 150. Now let's take a look at the line of fighting and poison type moves. As you can see, the diminishing returns still apply, but the overall power conversion is much less generous and caps out way lower. In fact, if you use 2 moves of the same power twice in a row, in this case let's say you use Ice Beam or Max Hailstorm twice in a row, and you compare that to using Sludge Bomb Bomb and then Ice Beam in its max form, of course, the non-poison type move would actually outdamage using a poison type move first, because, you know, 130 plus 130 is bigger than 90 plus, you know, 195. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that Game Freak knew that snowballing from these moves could get out of hand, especially considering you're also boosting your partner stats, and so they applied a limiter to keep these things in check. And it actually worked. Like, Max Ooze and Max Knuckle were some of the worst max moves in the game, despite the fact that they had arguably one of the strongest secondary effects.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like they're good for like a normal playthrough because it does snowball like really fast. But yeah, I guess in a competitive sense, it's a little bit easier to counter for those.
This kind of balance philosophy runs true for a lot of the things with Dynamax. But there's a key word that I use there, and that's almost, because I have been hyping up Dynamax a lot, but with any mechanic that's so impactful, there are going to be some things that are, once again, a bit more off than on. So, for all the things that Dynamax did well, there were a couple pretty major balancing issues. To start with, there is one huge glaring flaw, one that almost threatened to ruin the mechanic altogether, and it actually has to do with just the same great balancing that I was just talking about. Stat boosts on moves. Game Freak may have foreseen the destructive potential of Max Ooze and Max Knuckle, but they missed the unstoppable speed stacking effect of Max Airstream. The more people played Sword and Shield, the more they realized that this move was just absolutely broken. Speed control is one of the most important things in Pokemon, and the ability to not only boost your speed, but also do way more damage than you would otherwise, it really threatened to break the game. Flying moves use the usual damage conversion, meaning that players were able to click Max Airstream with no downside and a whole lot of benefit. At its worst, it wasn't all that uncommon that both players would Dynamax and then just start spamming Max Airstream, looking like two dumb Dynamax Pokemon telling each other exactly as they just both used Max Airstream for the duration of their Dynamaxes. This wasn't the only Max move that caused problems, but the others were less universal. One of the Pokemon that got that new look should be expected. It's Charizard, Game Freak's favorite son, who at this point has had more handouts from daddy than a trust fund kid.
Yeah, but to be fair, I mean, like everyone's like, oh, Charizard's super overrated, but like, I mean, everyone likes him. I feel like no one doesn't like him. He's been liked since the beginning of the game, so I feel like it makes sense. Like him and Pikachu, and I guess Eevee now. I feel like all three of those deserve like everything.
With Mega gone, Charizard needed a new way to stay relevant, and Game Freak saw fit to do so with one of the most broken moves that they've ever created, G-Max Wildfire. This move, instead of setting up the sun, sets up a terrain effect. If used even once, every non-fire type on your opponent's side of the field will take 1/6 of their HP and damage at the end of the turn.
That shit was crazy.
For 4 turns. That means that the passive benefit from using this move once is 2/3 of your opponent's health lost on both Pokemon they have on the field, unless they have, you know, a fire type. And the effect doesn't stop if you switch out. To be clear, this is 1/3 of your opponent's total team HP in a worst case scenario, eviscerated just as a passive effect. So like just from using the move as a side effect. To make matters worse, Charizard's other stab max move was Max Airstream. This thing was totally broken. This is actually the same side effect that G-Max Colossal had, which is what I used to win the Players Cup 2, and the other Kanto starters used it as well, which led to a fair bit of Venusaur play and a little bit of Blastoise play as well, but Charizard was by far the biggest problem. It was the best natural attacker, it was able to use Max Airstream, and it was actually able to use its G-Max form before its fellow Kanto starters, and was able to rain down Burning Destruction in an earlier regulation. As if all this wasn't bad enough, Charizard also has the Solar Power ability, which creates absolutely absurd multiplicative scaling. If you had the Sun up, you were getting a boost not only from Gigantamax generally, but also from the Sun boosting fire type moves, but also from Solar Power, and also from the Life Orb, which is the main item used on Charizard.
Yeah, it's very similar actually to Miraidon with his Hadron Endron. Like he just gets all these multipliers, and it's and also the move. I forget. I'm blanking on the move right now. Electro Drift, is that the move? It just gets all these freaking multipliers. I'm like, dude, it just kills. It's just gonna kill. Like, even if you resist it, you're still taking like most of your health in one attack. It's insane.
In other words, G-Max Charizard could one-shot pretty much any Pokemon in the game in the sun, or like nearly any Pokemon in the game. And then it also had this ridiculous passive side effect.
That's crazy.
It was actually a huge
that
problem.
adds on.
Now, the
to
only
it
good thing about
big time.
Gigantamax Charizard is that my friends and I realized just how broken this thing was before I think most other players did, and we ended up using it to dominate the first tournament of Sword and Shield, with Dr. Aaron Trailer winning the entire thing. However, this was a bit of a harbinger harbinger for bad things to come. As the format progressed and the power level got higher, Pokemon did end up getting picked more for the benefit of their moves rather than anything else. Remember how I said that Kartana got a new look thanks to Dynamax? Well, that is true, but it's more strictly speaking because not only was it a good Pokemon generally, but it could use Aerial Ace, which let it have access to max Airstream. Stacking power on top of power did on occasion get out of control, especially when you add the Life Orb in. Not to mention when you add in restricted Pokemon, which are even stronger than normal. In general, I think that Dynamax hit its sweet spot between fun and balance in the middle of Sword and Shield, when we'd all developed more nuance in using it, but we also weren't quite in the terrifying land of just, you know, Gigantamax Charizard running everything, Groudon running everything, Calyrex Ice, don't even want to talk about that. But even with all of its flaws, I still personally enjoyed playing with Dynamax, and I think that its introduction might have been one of the most purely beneficial events in Pokemon's history. We started this video talking about Pokemon Champions,
that's what I was gonna say.
even though at the time I'm recording this, Dynamax has not been confirmed at all for these games. So Dynamax may or may not be in the game. I personally suspect it will be, but that's just my hunch. But another mechanic was confirmed to return, and that's Terrestrialization, the current mechanic of Scarlet and Violet. Terrestrialization is, in my opinion, easily the best generational mechanic to ever be introduced. And this time, this actually isn't an unpopular opinion. I think many people agree with it. And I think that Terrestrialization owes a huge amount of success to Dynamax. So much of the philosophy of Terrestrialization comes from Dynamax. It's a mechanic that you have to consider on every single Pokemon. It takes no cost to use, unlike the item slots of Megas or Z moves. And despite some early concerns, we often see it used more for defense than for offense. Again, it can give some offensive benefit, and some Pokemon do use it for that same power stacking effect. But
I definitely think it's more, I mean, I don't know about VGC, but I feel like the way I see it played, it's way more used for defensive, because you're like, need to live this next hit, or I'm preparing to live this hit on this mon, that way I can get a setup move off and then win the game from there, you know? So use it as a defensive play so you can get some, you know, some momentum. I like it for that more.
It's more a problem with those Pokemon in particular rather than the mechanic itself. Looking at you, Urshifu, a lot of Pokemon use it purely defensively, an even bigger shift towards that aspect of play than Dynamax. And in changing type permanently for the battle, Game Freak has created a mechanic that is even more sophisticated in terms of both the when and the who. The timing mix-ups and the rhythmic switches of Terrestrialization only refine the Dynamax formula, making for some of the deepest and most high-skill Pokemon that we've ever seen. Love it or hate it, I think that Dynamax represented a shift in competitive Pokemon. Sure, Dynamax might have ended up with some balancing problems, but overall, it was an even-handed mechanic that was far better balanced than Megas. In my opinion, the advent of Dynamax was the advent of a new age of Pokemon, one where things were balanced looking at all Pokemon rather than a select few. The ability to use it on the fly, the freedom to Dynamax any Pokemon, all these were crucial new implementations in Pokemon's history, and it set the stage for what was to come. For those of you who really do hate Dynamax, I get it, really. I don't fully agree with it personally, but I can say that Dynamax took over competitive play in a way that no other mechanic had previously. Megas could be less over-centralizing if they were balanced better, and Terra is oftentimes very subtle, but I still value the deep nuance available, and I'm willing to forgive a Charizard or a Life Orb or a Max Airstream in exchange for a Gigantamax Whimsicott or a well-timed defense drop from Max Phantasm. If Dynamax does return in Pokemon Champions, chances are that all this might go out the window. Its interaction with Terrestrialization and Mega Evolution is an unstable formula that could implode. But even if it doesn't return, I still think that it made its very, very big mark, and I'm hopeful for the inspiration that it could continue to give this series. Now the only question is, what's going to happen when Generation 10 finally does release?
All right, you convinced me, Wolfie. Maybe it's better than Mega Evolutions in a competitive sense. I like Mega Evolutions a little bit more just because it's more fun, in my opinion. But it would be interesting, Champions, if they put all three in, because how would that even work? I definitely want Terrestrialization and Megas in, but if they get Dynamax in there too, ooh, that'll be some interesting battles, and I would be very interested to see like where the meta goes. But with that, guys, appreciate everyone watching. It was a fun one. That was a really fun one, honestly. If you guys want more like me reacting to Wolfie, I'm so down. That was actually a really fun video to talk about. But with that, I'll see you guys all in the next one. Hit the like button. Obviously, subscribe to Wolfie and myself. And with that, see you in the next one. Again, I'm sorry I keep saying that.